Alright, today we are reacting to the Call of Duty games the world forgot by Rocket Sloth. So yeah, this video seems interesting to me. Now, I remember back then, Call of Duty used to have a lot more games than just the main series coming out. They used to have a lot of mobile games, like little spin-offs on handheld consoles, and just a lot of smaller games, but now they just only make exclusively big games. And so I would like to hear about these smaller games and see what makes them unique.
Ever hear about Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified or COD Strike Team? What about the old cell phone games or classic zombies on iPhone? Look at all these DS games. Surely this one was the old cell phone games or classic zombies on
Classic zombies. God, man, I remember always wanting zombies on my iPad or iPhone back then. But like it was very hard to convince my parents to buy me anything like just digital. Anything that wasn't like a physical Xbox game or any other game, it was kind of a challenge.
iPhone. Look at all these DS games.
Black Ops, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 Defiance, Mobilized, and World at War. Only two of them have a subtitle.
Surely this one was a classic, right? I know Luke loves Modern Warfare 2. There's a huge number of Call of Duty games that released that weren't main Call of Duty titles of that year. Awesome.
I was trying to see, is that regular Black Ops or is
There's a
that...
huge number of Call of Duty...
Because why is it so pushed in? I think this is the Vita version because it looks like PlayStation buttons, but obviously this isn't the normal Call of Duty screen.
Duty games that released that weren't main Call of Duty titles of that year. Awesome. A surprise bonus for Call of Duty fans. Or were they some wild cash grab? When looking back at all of these types of games, no one looks back at Modern Warfare 3 and thinks, hey, yeah, I loved playing this game on the DS. So what actually was going on with some of these odd-ended games that released over the years? That's what we're gonna try to figure out. So
Is that Call of Duty Online?
Call of Duty game the world has mostly forgotten about. Now we're gonna separate this video into chapters based on the release order, but first we need to quickly look at the early years of Call of Duty. Call of Duty 1 for the N-Gage is a thing. Now this is a port of the original Call of Duty game, I think. I mean, I'm pretty sure the story and game follows the levels of the original, but the graphics here are so reduced, it's very, very different. It's really hard to tell what's going on here. Now, if you don't remember, the Nokia N-Gage was kind of one of the first smartphones ever released. It came out all the way back in 2002 and was the first major attempt to try to combine a mobile phone and a video game device together to try to lure players away from things like the Game Boy Advance. While this device did have a lot of publishers willing to sign on and throw their games on the platform, including Call of Duty, the device never really stuck around for that long, and the line of N-Gages died off in 2009. So for 2004 standards, when this thing released, it is really interesting that we have a first-person shooter Call of Duty game as the first ever port to a mobile device for COD. Like I said, the graphics are not impressive at all, but the fact that it tries to stay close to the source material, it's at least somewhat impressive for the time that it released, and it's...
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I forget what that is. The D-pad? Like, the D-pad back then, it's like that's how you were mostly scrolling through your contacts, and that's how you dialed sometimes on the D-pad, and that you were clicking options. Man, I remember having a flip phone back then and having my own D-pad that I had to do that to, like, pick and choose, like, who I was gonna call, or a couple of other things that I can't exactly remember that you had to use the D-pad for. Also playing little games on that, man, it's nostalgia, but obviously it's much better now with smartphones of today.
More closely related to a Call of Duty game than some of the other entries we're going to be looking at on this list. Like, for instance, the year 2007. What an interesting year for Call of Duty. It was a big year. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare would release, which would throw Call of Duty into, like, a new level of popularity. Then, on top of that, 5 more Call of Duties, all different, would also release that year.
And there's people that think yearly COD releases are too much.
So where do we start? Call of Duty 2 on mobile phones. This one came out a year after Call of Duty 3 came out, which is interesting, but what is this? Yeah, during the era of ringtone scams games and surprise monthly charges on your phone bills. There were a ton of weird crossovers for phone games, and it was a time where phone games were charged in like a really egregious and anti-consumer way. But yeah, we had a Call of Duty game. It was a top-down game, interestingly enough, where you have to essentially dodge bullets and shoot enemies to make your way to the top of the map. It's pretty basic, but if you could complete a level, you would be rewarded with text, giving you context to your contribution in World War II. I never did get to play this one, but it is interesting that this started the line of mobile games that would release on a pretty regular basis for the Call of Duty franchise moving forward. Call of Duty 2 also had a release for Windows Pocket, and this is an unexpected full
Windows
game that actually came
Pocket.
out, and I never got to experience this one. Honestly, I wouldn't even know how to play this game. You had to have a Pocket PC. It was like a little device which came with a stylus. Now what's interesting is that this game borrowed assets from the PC counterpart, but apparently all of the levels are unique, which is really impressive. So it's not like the N-Gage version, which was a port just watered down. This one kind of did its own thing, but it probably is almost as obscure, if not more obscure, than that N-Gage version of the game. Now, from what I can tell, this game
I wonder if these people like just bought the phones and they just so happen to find, whoa, this has Call of Duty 1 or 2, and now they're showing them off on YouTube being like, this is a rare collectible. Hardly anyone in the world has this game anymore. Or are these people that had this since their childhood and have been like banking up being like, damn, now we're the only ones in the world that have this? Because like I kind of wish I would have kept my old phone. Who knows like what games are gonna be gone forever from those old phones that you could only play on that, because these games like wouldn't be ported to modern phones nowadays.
actually runs surprisingly well considering what it is and how small the player base must have been back in the day. So I think this is a really interesting relic of the past. There was even an online mode with Team Deathmatch. I do really wish there was more information about this. There's not that much more known about this game. It's almost borderline lost media at this point. But yeah, who would have thought Call of Duty 2 for Windows Pocket was such a unique experience?
I mean, if someone
Let's
has
move on
it,
to the games that
it's
we
not
actually
really
could
lost
play, though, for this
media.
video, because this was an interesting ride in itself. Call of Duty Roads to Victory for the original PSP back in 2007, you know, when COD 4 was originally releasing. You know, Activision, they were throwing Call of Duty everywhere this year, and they put this one on the PSP, which has interesting history too, because this PSP game would also be later re-released as a free bonus to anybody who would buy Black Ops D.
Roads to Victory. Interesting. So you got a double feature of games.
Classified for the PS Vita, so this game saw 2 releases on the PSP and then again a re-release on the PS Vita. Now, as for this game, what are we looking at here?
A very interesting idea for a video game. And honestly, I remember playing this back in the day, and I actually did quite like this game. The campaign is very good, actually, and it is a solid World War II experience with various missions and different aspects of the war you get to see. Now, you do have to remember, when this game came out, we only had COD 1, 2, and 3. And as a younger fella, I think I was 12 at the time, I thought this game was the absolute greatest thing I ever played. And that was maybe because I wasn't allowed to play shooter games. But anyways, I thought this was a solid experience. I think this is as good as Call of Duty 1 through 3. And obviously, the formula for COD would completely change in 2007 with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. So this game became kind of dated quickly.
But hey, that wasn't it for COD in 2007. We of course had Call of Duty 4 for the Nintendo DS. And this would be the first ever Nintendo DS Call of Duty game, and this would start the era of Call of Duty on DS, which was kind of its own thing for a while. Sometime before 2007,
Call of
Activision
Duty on
signed a deal
DS.
with a studio located in Florida known as N-Space, and for the following years, N-Space would be working on the Nintendo DS versions of all Call of Duty games. But things were interesting to say the least when it came to these DS titles. We sat down and actually played all of the DS games for this video. Starting things off, we did notice for most of the DS games here, the performance is a little rough. Surely back in the day, we didn't care about any of this because, I mean, hey, it's Call of Duty on the DS! This is huge! This is exciting! But looking back now, after playing modern games, it sometimes feels like a slideshow if things get a little too busy on the screen. You do get used to it after a minute. Now, with COD 4 right away in the campaign side of things, which is very loosely connected to the story, at the beginning you learn basic things like shooting, grenade throwing, bomb defusal, which is way more stressful than you would expect it to be. And then I even got to call in an air...
Bomb defusal being stressing. Who would have guessed?
strike, which was interesting because they had me training how to call in a real airstrike on a friendly tank that was only 10 feet away. And then after that, we get ambushed suddenly, and you're thrown right into, like, conflict, which is interesting. We had to shoot some bad guys, and then I jumped in a truck and left. I did notice they used the official COD 4 music in some sections, which I thought was really cool. The next level of the game had me on this, like, huge on-rail shooting mission. I got to shoot at some trucks with bad guys. I got to shoot at some bad guys. I got to shoot at a helicopter by some bad guys. And then after that, I got to jump out with the boys, and then I would die a lot, and then respawn, and then die some more. We had to shoot through these alleys, and man, I gotta say, for just playing on like regular difficulty, combat is kind of hard here. You die really easily, and the controls definitely take some getting used to maneuvering around with the stylus on a Nintendo DS. The story is very bare bones. It doesn't focus on any of the main plot points established in Call of Duty 4, though it supposedly takes place during the same time, and it just has, I don't know, like these Marines and SAS members side questing, while apparently the main conflict featured in COD 4 is actually going on. Still, some inspirations from COD 4 were obviously used here, like this level that looks like Wetwork or some of the other locales. This game also had multiplayer, and it had a few maps. This one obviously looks like Wetwork from the real COD 4, but otherwise I looked through some of the other maps and there was nothing really spectacular. But this was just the first entry in the DS series of games. They would continue to make more of these every year for a while, but before we fully leave 2007 behind, there was one more Call of Duty game. Call of Duty 4 Mobile. I don't know, this was kind of like Call of Duty 2, but this time is Modern Warfare themed. From what I can tell, it does play a little bit different, but the story is actually kind of hard here. It follows a squad searching for Al-Assad, which is like way more of a connection to the main COD 4 story than the DS version had. And then at the end of the story, they meet their eventual demise, which is kind of tragic. Like, I can imagine someone crying over their LG Envy as their squad doesn't make it to the end. But wow, what a game. Apparently it only released on the Verizon store, so you had to have like a very specific phone plan if you were able to buy this game. And it probably charged you egregiously, like we talked about earlier, just to play this. 2008 saw some more Call of Duty games, though this time not as many, so maybe the quality would be much better here. 2008, of course, was the year of Call of Duty World at War, releasing on the Xbox 360 and on the PlayStation 3. Heck, it even came out on the Wii this time, which was something that was kind of always up in the air when it came to Call of Duty titles early on in this generation. But here's one thing I found very interesting. I guess Activision still felt like there was a large enough PlayStation 2
the PlayStation 2, yeah,
they wanted to provide
version
some
of World
sort
at
of
War
experience to capitalize on those people holding out with their PS2s still, so they created a whole separate game called Call of Duty World at War Final Fronts, which developed by a studio known as Rebellion Developments, who are mostly known for their work on Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix for the PlayStation Portable. But yeah, it had its own campaign that was
did them dirty. They have done like the Zombie Army trilogy. What's not trilogy now? It's like there's 4 games. Zombie Army 4 Quadrilogy? I think that's what it's called. But yeah, they're a pretty good studio from some of the stuff I've seen. I know they also made a couple of other good games, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Was completely separate from World at War's story. They just kind of went off and did their own thing here. Okay, so Call of Duty World at War Final Fronts. It's a game that definitely exists. I can say that about it. It's definitely not the greatest Call of Duty game to ever release, but it did have a few things going for it at the very least. I mean, it's a 2008 PS2 game. What can we expect? Now, this game has its own campaign completely separated from the main campaign that was featured in the other console releases of World at War, and you experience the story through 3 different factions. The American Marines in Japan. You also play as American forces in Europe, and then British forces in Europe as well. It's interesting to note, though, that the Japanese side of the story loosely follows the Japanese front from the main World at War games, though the mission levels are completely different. The locales are a lot of the time inspired from what was actually used in World at War. Also, Kiefer Sutherland is here playing Roebuck as your main sergeant, but in this game, we're not Private C. Miller from World at War, we're Private Joe Miller. So we still get called Private Miller in this. Now, while a lot of the Japanese side of the story does follow the main overlying events of the World at War plotline, it does differ quite a bit in objectives, and at the end of the game, both Polanski and Roebuck end up surviving, which is different from the actual World at War release. The non-Pacific campaign shows other protagonists too, like Private Tom Sharp, who is in the British 6th Airborne Division, and Private Lucas Gibson of the US 80th Infantry Division. And on these campaigns, we see Allied forces pushing into places like Belgium, Austria, and Germany. Now, right away, the game starts out actually feeling like a Call of Duty game, maybe an older Call of Duty game, like those more old school COD 1, 2, 3 type CODs, but Call of Duty nonetheless, and then like stuff hits the fan, and you're immediately just thrown into the thick of it, where there is just like full-on apocalyptic level warfare going on, the sky's red, everything is exploding, and it's a little bit chaotic. I think this is maybe where the gameplay kind of falls apart a bit. I think the mix of poor AI.
But yeah, that UI is pretty garbage. Like I don't know, it seems so old-timey. Like it seems more like a PS1 game than an actual PS2 game. I've seen so many good-looking PS2 games. So this one, I don't know, is super disappointing to look at.
which is kind of evident in some sections here, and some of the levels feeling like a little bit of a repetitive, large section of just like running past stuff and killing enemies along the way. This seems to be maybe the most restrictive thing about World at War Final Fronts. And then of course this game didn't have a multiplayer mode at all. Not even some cheap local mode you could throw together and play split screen with friends. This game kind of just exists, and it's weird. I'm sure someone out there really enjoyed this game, and there are things to
Man, a Call of Duty game without any multiplayer. That is surprising and super disappointing.
like about it, but yeah, it's not the best Call of Duty experience by any means. But what about Call of Duty World at War for the Nintendo DS? I actually had this one as a teenager. I think we were traveling somewhere as a family, and I wanted to have a Call of Duty game to have with me while I was away from the Xbox 360, and World at War was all the hype, so I picked it up for the DS at GameStop. I probably traded in a couple of old games I hadn't played in a while and scraped together just enough money to buy this game. I'll be honest, I was pretty disappointed in this game as a younger player. Looking back at it now, I kind of see it. Maybe I was too harsh on it back then. Maybe I wasn't harsh enough. Okay, so much like COD 4 for the DS, and this was made by the same developer, we have a story that is unrelated to the main story, though somewhat inspired by the same story. It's kind of like they took all the concept art for World at War and gave it out to these developers working on the side games, and were like, hey, make a campaign that goes to some of these locales, like Macon Atoll or Silo Heights. There are some improvements to the geometry in World at War DS compared to COD 4, and I think the game runs a little bit smoother here. And once again, the story sees you play as different soldiers in 3 different militaries. Once again, the Marines in Japan and Okinawa, a British SAS private known as Owen Paisley, and this one has you play as a Soviet Army private, Private Dimarkaradu. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce this. Once again, there are similarities to a lot of the plot points hit in the main World at War game, like for instance, at the end of the Russian campaign, the Red Army pushes up and takes the Reichstag, and the Japan side of the game has taking over an old castle. I do find it interesting there was this extra European campaign that seems to be in both of these other World at War games that never made it into the final console release of the game, and knowing that there's a lot of cut content from the final World at War game makes us think that these games maybe included a perspective that was originally supposed to be in World at War that ended up getting cut due to time constraints. I don't think this would be the definitive way to experience those stories though, but it is still interesting how both of these games had this British side of the story as well that wasn't featured in the main game. Surprisingly enough, this game actually got favorable reviews despite the fact that both times I've played through this, I have not really enjoyed my playthrough of it. This game also did have multiplayer and an online.
Yeah, I don't know if I would ever like seek out any of these Call of Duties or any of these games. Like anything that's not made by Nintendo on the DS, I'm like, nah, I don't want to play that. Like, is there any good third-party games that are not exclusive? I don't think so. Because anything that's not like Sonic, Mario, or just a Nintendo thing, I just can't imagine it being that good.
Multiplayer, which is more than what the PS2 version of the game can say, so there's that. And then there was Call of Duty World at War for mobile phones. Once again, another one of those like games that was made not for smartphones, but like the generation before that. This one plays a lot like all of the other ones that we've looked at. You're kind of just running around in this far back third-person perspective. You have to like shoot some enemies and move up as you can. There were some more inspiration taken from the actual World at War game this time around though, which is kind of nice, and some of the animations are a little bit better. You can use a flamethrower, which is a nice touch. But yeah, there's not too much to say, and these games aren't
Yeah,
really
the sprite work is
all that well.
actually pretty good, I would say. Not really an artist, but I mean, these are very nice figures for being on the generation before smartphones.
Days either. I think ultimately this game ended up getting heavily overshadowed though by the very first Call of Duty title to make its way to the iOS, Call of Duty Zombies. Yes, when Call of Duty World at War released for the Xbox 360 and PS3, this version of the game introduced zombies to Call of Duty for the first time ever, and it was a breakout
Zombies.
success and maybe even a surprise. So a year later, a Call of Duty World at War Zombies game would be released for iOS, which was a huge deal and was actually really groundbreaking for what
As I said earlier, I really wanted this game so bad. I'm so mad that they currently like have taken it off stores. And I'm pretty sure there was also one for Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2.
what type of games could even exist
I can't
on an
remember.
iPhone or an iPod Touch. Developed by IdeaWorks Game Studios, this game originally just had the first zombies map, Knockdown Toten, and players would have to use the touchscreen controls to navigate and survive as long as they could. Now, interestingly enough, I remember playing this when it first came out. The controls weren't all that bad, actually. After a little bit of getting used to, you could walk around, aim, shoot, and survive, and while there wasn't a sprint option, the zombies were scaled in their speed, so
I wonder if you can play this on modern phones, because usually I'm pretty sure you can play anything you own on iPhone or iPad or any of that. So I think this could possibly work on the newer phones, although I'm not 100% sure on that. I wish somebody would tell me, or maybe I can look that up.
you can always slightly outrun them at walking speed. I think it's really interesting that the tutorial for this game, teaching you how to play the game, shows the character Richtofen from Call of Duty World at War Zombies, and he's teaching you how to survive before he ends up turning into a zombie himself. Also, it's worth noting this game had co-op mode where you could play online in parties of 4. This was really, really groundbreaking that a game of this quality, coming off the heels of us being used to DS releases of Call of Duty, was available on the iPhone. But then, in an unexpected twist, things got even better here. While just having the first map alone was a pretty big success, and probably what a lot of people just
Is it going to be free updates, or did you have to buy the maps? That's what I'm guessing.
expected. Since the first map is the smallest of all of them, this app would continue to be developed on, and DLC would release for a paid price, usually $5, including all of the DLC maps of zombies from World at War as well. So Verrucht would release, and later on Shinonuma would come out as well. Even Deriza, with all of its complexities and Pack-a-Punch, would get added in here too. And I remember playing this quite a bit during the summer months of...
So I think the game is $10, and so you would pay $5 for each of them. So that's like 15 plus 10, 25 for the entire package.
2010 maybe. This game actually stuck around for a really long time, and it remained in the App Store all the way up until 2018, so a lot of you may have actually played this one, and it was a pretty cool experience. There would be a follow-up game that eventually would go very downhill, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but 2009 was also a very
Man,
game that eventually...
I'm super interested to hear that. That's basically a teaser, because I want to know, what does he mean by that? How did they screw that up? Making another zombies game, but somehow worse.
would go very downhill, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But 2009 was also a very big year for Call of Duty, as it saw the release of Modern Warfare 2, one of the biggest Call of Duty games of its time. Where do we even begin with this? Okay, this time around, instead of just naming all of the little side games that came out at the same time exactly the same as the main release of the game, Activision took a different approach, naming every Modern Warfare 2 game that released simultaneously its own title if it wasn't the main game. For instance, the DS game wasn't even called Modern Warfare 2. It was called Modern Warfare Mobilized, though the box art obviously was using the same key art from Modern Warfare 2. Now, since we had to look at 22 titles for this video, Luke was the one that actually looked and played through this one.
And right away, the first thought on my mind was, is there no Russian level in this game? Spoiler, there's not.
You will notice with Modern Warfare Mobilized, the voice acting for sure is something else.
Prince Fahad was seen today for the first time since his family fled the violence in the former kingdom.
My people will not stand for this illegal occupation.
Yeah, this game is interesting. It's also, you know, standard to that DS lag, and this really just makes the whole gameplay slow down. It makes it harder to aim, and the ADS can be really confusing at times with the way that you have to click on the screen, and we noticed from all the DS
this is
games,
so
trying to use
ugly.
your ADS sometimes just takes more time than just shooting from the hip. Luke did notice that there's a puzzle like halfway through the first mission where you have to guess 3-digit codes, and then these lights will tell you how many are right, and if they are wrong, and the right position. But the puzzle also doesn't tell you what number is right or wrong. It's like a Wordle type game, but with numbers instead here, and there's this like self-destruct timer that starts. It can get pretty stressful. Now, Luke did mention that this game was really, really hard and kept dying. Maybe it would have helped if Luke played the previous titles, because part of the level required him to call in an airstrike, and he had some trouble figuring out how to do that, where, you know me, I had my experience calling an airstrike 10 feet away from me. There are some other interesting things that come up here that weren't in the other Call of Duty games, like you have to take out an APC to finish a level with an RPG, and Modern Warfare 2 for the DS, or Modern Warfare Mobilized if we want to get real specific, has 16 levels of just this type of stuff. Long story short, I think the campaign is mostly about tracking down a nuclear device that the villain from the first Modern Warfare DS game might have purchased. I didn't even know there were villains in that. It seems like the soldiers keep getting to the locations like 3 or 4 times, the nuke gets transported away every time, but eventually they catch up to the nuke and disarm it when it's in Russia. So once again, it doesn't really have to do anything with the Modern Warfare story itself, and also doesn't seem like there's any characters from any of the main Call of Duty games featured in this game either. Also, the story is kind of generic. Like, we have a bad guy named Prince Farhad, but they didn't even bother to specify what country he's from. They just said he's the
Farhad.
former rulers of a Middle Eastern country. You know, some deep lore building here. And of course, there was a multiplayer with this one as well, with 8 maps. They're relatively small, but you know, this was only a 6-person multiplayer game, so you could either host a local 3v3, and with the Nintendo WFC network closing down, you can't connect to the online servers, I guess, but maybe with some tunneling software or something you could, but that'd be doing a lot to play online multiplayer in Call of Duty Modern Warfare Mobilized. The maps are pretty small and generic. There's this map that looks like a Walmart version of Crash from COD 4. There are also some extra modes you can unlock, like a challenge mode that throws you in a campaign level and gives you a time limit to kill a certain amount of enemies. There's even a survival mode that can throw you on a multiplayer map and have you just survive an onslaught of enemies, but yeah, that's Modern Warfare 2 Mobilized on the DS, but it wasn't the last one in the Modern Warfare trilogy, because we would see a Modern Warfare 3 release too, but with Modern Warfare games releasing every other year, we also had a Black Ops game that would come to the DS next. But hold up, where are we going? We can't leave Modern Warfare 2 behind. There were other games, like Modern Warfare 2 Force Recon for the mobile phone. Once again, this time they did call it Modern Warfare 2, but added a subtitle so you didn't get it confused with the main Modern Warfare 2. For phones that aren't iOS, once again, I think you guys can probably guess what the gameplay was like, and you'd be pretty accurate. I will say
Top-down.
these games, with each iteration, become more and more interesting. Like, there's a lot more left and right movement besides just running up. So look, they're innovating, I guess. Okay, now we can move forward and finally talk about Call of Duty Black Ops for the DS. The first DS game to introduce zombies mode. Wow. That's big, right? Now, with the game as narratively driven as Call of Duty Black Ops was, I was really curious to see what they would do with Black Ops on the DS, and I will give them some credit. They at least tried to develop a storyline that was involved in the Black Ops story. I mean, they're limited here, it's a DS, but the story is a little bit interesting. Apparently, it takes place prior to the main Black Ops game at the beginning, where your character, Shaw, was like captured in Cuba alongside Alex Mason, the main character from Call of Duty Black Ops. A big part of the game is just escaping from some Cuban catacombs and just make their way out of Cuba overall, and then the second half of the game has a lot to do with battling in Vietnam, trying to prevent the movement of Nova gas, which another part of the Black Ops campaign. Later on in the campaign, you play as a couple different characters, though, going to a few other locations, but the whole back half of the campaign is all about trying to prevent Nova 6 from being delivered to the United States. This is actually, at the very least, probably the strongest DS story that we've seen so far, as it has the most connection to the main plot. There weren't a whole lot of being
Damn, that's actually kind of badass.
game, which I would have enjoyed. But this game also apparently made some big improvements in the multiplayer side of things, back when multiplayer was still a thing you could do on the DS, like there were perk systems built into the game. But by far, the biggest improvement with Black Ops was, of course, the Zombies mode being introduced to a DS game. Now, I'll be honest, I played a little bit of this, and Zombies on the DS is way harder than the console version of the game. Now, we do have 4 maps,
You
which
die
is
in
actually
one
quite a
hit?
lot, though the maps are really small. And coming to this game after playing the iPhone version, I will say this is a bit of a downgrade. It's not as good as the iPhone version or the original version, though it's still Zombies on the DS, which is overall a W. I'm pretty sure a lot of people who had this game back in the day really enjoyed it, especially with how challenging the difficulty is. Now, there are some familiar things, like there's the random box, there's weapons on the wall.
The
that you can buy,
random
barriers that
box.
zombies seem to just go
He doesn't even say the mystery box, the random box.
through really easily, but there's also no wonder weapons, so you're not going to see like a ray gun or a thunder gun or anything like that. There's no perk machines or pack-a-punch either. They did include dogs though, like the Hellhounds, so that seems fair. I will give them credit, they did have local online and co-op mode available for this, so you would be able to play with a friend. I think it was limited to just one other player, don't quote me on that, but from what I'm able to see from here, we can't connect online once again. But yeah, I think this is a cool feature. I think it would be really awesome if one day we get another Zombies Chronicles DLC, if they just like threw these maps in because they're so basic. It'd be really easy to do it in a modern game like Black Ops, for example. I'm sure the modding community could do it too, but I would like to see an official release of these maps to some capacity, not for the gameplay experience as much as I think it would be really cool to see these levels preserved for their historical significance of being zombies on a DS. Okay, but then we had Call of Duty Black Ops Mobile, and this was the last Call of Duty Black Ops game to release on like the old generation of phones. Everything here going forward was all on smartphones. This game didn't really seem to change that much. It's a lot like the other mobile games of Call of Duty released over the past, really just
This doesn't even look like a Call of Duty game. This looks like a completely different series that they took random assets and then just slapped Call of Duty on the name.
3 years at this point, except this time the story involves Vietnam, and it does actually seem to have a little bit more narrative than some of the other ones, so there is some effort there, but not, you know, you're not getting like a AAA experience out of a game that looks like this. I think whether you played Black Ops Mobile or any of the other Call of Duty mobile games, your experience is probably really similar. Maybe you had some fun on a long car ride playing one of these games, but for the most part, I don't think that these are games that like people are, you know, longing for really.
I'm trying to figure out which one is the player. Like, I'm just wondering if he's using a D-pad or something. Like, how the hell do you play this game? Like, is he taking cover with one button and then using the D-pad to shoot?
There was one more Black Ops related thing that came out, but before we get to that, technically Modern Warfare 3 Defiance for the DS released at the end of 2011, marking the final Nintendo DS Call of Duty game to ever release. Now this one definitely built off the Black Ops DS improvements that were made, and from there were a couple other little tweaks and refinements made, I think mostly on the multiplayer side of things. Now the game is actually set around the time of the last mission of the Modern Warfare 2 main release, and the events that lead up into Modern Warfare 3,
He just kept shooting his friends.
and it takes you to more places in the US side of things than any other DS game. Like, we get to go to Alaska, Nevada, and Baltimore. Who hasn't wanted to experience a Call of Duty-like experience in Baltimore? The multiplayer has 7 maps from previous titles and 7 new maps, so they're kind of paying homage to the DS games that came before it, which is kind of neat. Like, for instance, remember the map Shipyard from Modern Warfare 2 Mobilized? No? This one? Well, it's back, and it's way bigger for no apparent reason. Besides that, there are some other interesting cool locations that did show up in this multiplayer, like this casino, and, you know, these maps are made for DS, so how good can they actually be? But you know what? Modern Warfare...
Hold on, what?
And it's way bigger for no apparent reason. Besides that, there are some other interesting cool locations that did show up in this multiplayer, like this casino, and, you know, these maps are made for DS, so how good can they actually be? But you know what? Modern Warfare 3 was...
I can hardly hear him.
You know, these maps are made for DS, so how good can they
They're made for DS hardware.
be? But you know what?
So how big can they actually be?
Modern Warfare 3 was, at the very least, this Defiance version of the game, a big improvement from where they started with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare DS. Maybe not as big of an improvement as you would expect, but improvement nonetheless for having to, you know, make a DS recreate a Call of Duty-like experience. A few months after Modern Warfare 3's release, though, the iOS saw a follow-up game in Call of Duty Black Ops Zombies, which was incredible. It took the formula from Call of Duty World at War Zombies that released on iOS with those 4 maps and gave a Black Ops experience of that, where you got to play Kino der Toten right out of the gate. Now, this version of the game released also with online capabilities like World at War, except we could now use voice chat, which is big, I guess. And now there was the ability to do things like crouch and prone, which huge, you know what I mean? Now, the disappointing thing is with this release, it came out in a staggered way where it first released for Android and iOS in some countries, and later it rolled out to Android in other countries like 8 months later. They would release more content for it slowly with the release of Ascension, the first DLC map from Black Ops, and a special Call of the Dead Director's Cut, which features the original Zombies characters, but in Call of the Dead instead of the special characters from Black Ops. They even included Dead Ops Arcade, which was like a special hidden mode in Call of Duty Black Ops, and then that was it as far as new releases would go. Yeah, there were 3 Black Ops 1 zombie maps that were not included in the release of this game, and some speculated that
So they didn't put Shangri-La, they didn't put Moon, and they didn't put Origin.
they were going to do a Call of Duty Black Ops Zombies follow-up game, perhaps, that would include maybe the other 3 maps that were missing, but it never actually came. So unfortunately, you can't play 5, Shangri-La, or Moon in this version of the game, which always made this...
Oh yeah, so Shangri-La, Moon, and 5. Damn, I was thinking Origin from Black Ops 2.
game feel incomplete knowing that those other maps would come out and it just stops abruptly at Call of the Dead. But beggars couldn't be choosers. This was still something cool, and with all of the zombie maps combined at this point, we did have essentially 8 different zombie maps between 2 games to get to play on. This game would eventually also be delisted in 2018, and we still haven't had a true to form zombies experience yet. There has been a couple of things occasionally popping up on Call of Duty Mobile, the newer Call of Duty game, but nothing in the traditional sense of what we had. But now we're already in 2012, the year of Black Ops 2, and that was a big deal. This year saw the big release of Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified for the PS Vita. Now, as a teenager, I never had a PS Vita, but Luke did.
So I was actually one of the few people I know that owned one of these. And I think I might be the only one that still owns one of these. No, obviously, it had been a minute since I actually played this, but I do have to say...
No, this was the only ever Call of Duty that I saw from, like, Christmas listings and, like, other holidays being like, pick up Call of Duty Declassified. And when actually looking at gameplay, I was like, damn, this looks pretty good.
Back in the day, I mean, it was one of the Vita games that you would play, and there wasn't that many games on the Vita. I feel like it kind of is a failed console, so it was kind of nice to have a Call of Duty Black Ops on the Vita, but man oh man, the game itself was really bizarre. First of all, there wasn't a campaign. It was like these Spec Ops type missions. The missions themselves were kind of short, and they lacked a lot of depth. Visually, the game was fine, I thought, for a Vita title, but I remember reading reviews, and the reviews were kind of shitting on the graphics because, you know, the Call of Duties around that time looked better, but I mean, it was a video game, so I didn't expect too much. And the missions themselves, there was fun ones, and some of the locations were cool. And I mean, a lot of the characters that would appear in Black Ops 2 would appear in this game too, since it was kind of a, you know, prelude leading up to Call of Duty Black Ops. So I thought that was kind of neat. Now, besides the very short campaign and the very short missions you could play, and if you go to howlongtobeat.com, you can see that this game is only between
2
an hour 20
hours.
and 2 hours long. Multiplayer also lacked a lot of content. There was only 7 maps, and there wasn't a lot of variety in game modes either. Now, the multiplayer itself, once you loaded up on a game of Nuketown, it was actually kind of a ride. It was fun to play, like on a handheld, you know? It wasn't the worst experience I've ever had. Throughout editing this video, I've definitely seen worse games on handheld devices for Call of Duty. But yeah, there just wasn't much to this game. It really felt like a shell of a Call of Duty game. And I think that was the biggest issue, that it was just very, very basic. And I mean, you know, I'm a little nostalgic for this game in a way. If they ever decide to remaster this as a bonus to some Black Ops game, I would actually probably like that, because as a Spec Ops mode, I think it could be tagged onto a newer Call of Duty as a remastered Spec Ops mode, obviously. But yeah, this was a console exclusive Call of Duty game, and you know, we got this kind of game, and it really was underwhelming.
Moving forward, 2013 was the year of Call of Duty Ghosts, but before that, we did see an interesting release, Call of Duty Online.
Man, I swear, every single big shooter franchise, or at least big franchises in general, always get like a online game. Call of Duty Online, Halo Online, Sleeping Dogs Online, Dragon's Dogma Online. Like, so many games have gotten onlines, and sometimes the online games are super cool, but the companies always put them in somewhere like very niche to test out if that actual game will work. Like, I remember Halo being like China exclusive just so Microsoft can test out, would this be good, having a Halo game with every single thing from Halo's history in it, every single gun, every single vehicle, having armor abilities and gadgets. And I'm pretty sure Call of Duty Online was very popular in China. That's why it has like the Chinese text down there.
Online, which was released in China exclusively as a free-to-play Call of
Yep,
Duty
knew it.
experience that honestly was a Call of Duty fan's dream, practically. It took the best maps from COD 4, Black Ops.
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Literally, every time they do an online, it's everything you would want. Like, they take all the features from every single game and, like, cram them into one game. The only bad thing is that it's, like, free to play, so you probably need to pay for skins or armor or stuff like that. But if the gameplay is good, then I'm sure people would have had fun paying for anything like skins and weapon skins and all of that. Like, I don't know, it's just so weird that these companies choose to make the best games that require less resources, since it's not an entirely brand new experience. It's just reusing assets of weapons, maps, characters, and all of that.
Ops 1, Modern Warfare 2, even some stuff from Modern Warfare 3 and Black Ops 2, and combined them into some super Call of Duty game that had weapons and maps from all of the Call of Duty games combined, just the best of the best, and it was released as a free-to-play game exclusively in China. So, if you're a COD fan, you really couldn't experience this. I remember trying to play this back in the day because I loved the idea of it. Getting to go back and revisit some of my favorite maps, heck yeah. You had to like use a VPN and some tunneling software to connect, and then of course you had to play with terrible ping because the servers were only in China, which made the game practically unplayable. So, rest in peace there as someone living in North America, but hey, the people who were living in Asia and got to play that could have been a cool experience. It eventually did shut down, but it was a game that lasted for quite some time, and I think it paved the way for Call of Duty Mobile, which also combines like old classic maps and weapons that are familiar from older CODs, so there was some good that came out of it. Okay, we saw the release of a new full-on FPS Call of Duty game on smartphones in 2013 known as Call of Duty Strike Team, and they released for like $7, and this essentially was a full-on Call of Duty campaign that you could play on your smartphone, which is very interesting. I actually played this one, and I was impressed. I was expecting some like third-person pushing up a hill type thing like we saw in those.
I mean, isn't Strike Team basically the Call of Duty Black Ops 2 mode? Whereas, like, you play as a random soldier, and then you can go into an RTS to take control of those soldiers. So this is basically another Call of Duty Black Ops 2 mode.
Older Call of Duty things, and they put some effort into making this actually play like a real Call of Duty campaign. There was a story, and the story actually has nothing to do with Call of Duty Ghosts at all. If anything, when this released, I thought this was a tie-in for Call of Duty Ghosts, and that wasn't actually the case. Okay, now I do have a crazy conspiracy theory about Call of Duty Strike Team, considering the fact that the whole story has everything to do with the Black Ops story timeline and not anything to do with Call of Duty Ghosts. I almost suspect that this game was supposed to release a year earlier and then was delayed and pushed to release to coincide Call of Duty Ghosts, even though the story is very much Black Ops 2 inspired. Nonetheless, Call of Duty Strike Team takes place in the year 2020 and essentially directly ties into some of the plot points from Call of Duty Black Ops 2. Essentially, you're hunting down those associated with Raul Menendez and Cortes DA. They're trying to stop his plans to initiate essentially what is a second Cold War. Now, I will give credit where credit is due. This game does utilize a couple of recurring locations, but they utilize them in such a way where it doesn't necessarily feel super repetitive, and we do get almost a full campaign type experience here in a game that is first person, but then there's a lot of third person elements to this game as well. There is some strategy where you have to customize your squad's loadouts and abilities, and you kind of switch between this back recon type angle into the run and gun FPS view that most people are familiar with in a Call of Duty game. This was an interesting game to release, a little unexpected, and I don't think they really did anything like this ever again. Maybe they're testing the waters to see how a campaign would do released just randomly on iOS, and the game itself didn't really do too well in the charts. Matter of fact, about a year after this release, Activision announced that they would be closing down the studio Blast Furnace that was branched out of Activision specifically to make this title, and yeah, now that studio is no more, so no more Call of Duty Strike Team sequels.
Activision
So with that
axing
Call of Duty game
more
not working out too well,
studios.
the next year, 2014, we saw the release of Call of Duty Heroes, which was completely different than what you would expect from a Call of Duty title.
An
Though this game would bring
RTS.
back familiar faces from past Call of Duty games like Ghost, Soap, and Price. Call of Duty Heroes was essentially Call of Duty's response to the popularity of Clash of Clans. Okay, I want to just like go on this like tangent about how this is such a weird idea for Call of Duty to go down, but I bet you out there were some people who played this game and really thoroughly enjoyed it because the Clash of Clans formula is popular. Long story short, you take control of units that are called heroes in this game and you go and you destroy enemy bases. There are some things that are very Call of Duty inspired, like how heroes can get their own kill streaks to use, and there are popular kill streaks from Call of Duty games like Predator missiles or chopper gunners and whatnot. And to say the least, this game did get updates for a little while and managed to stay alive all the way through 2018. It made it 4 years before it finally was shut down, and it did release on more platforms than other ones releasing on iOS, Android, Windows, and Amazon. Fire phones were a thing, and then like the Fire tablets. This game was developed by a newer studio known as Face Roll Games. We absolutely cannot forget about Call of Duty Siege from 2016, not to be confused with, like Rainbow Six Siege. I don't think there's any connection there. But Call of Duty Siege saw a very limited release, which makes me suspect that perhaps this game was canceled to an extent after a partial release. It only came out in Australia and never saw a release
Siege is the card game spin-off of the shooter series and has a soft launch in Australia. Weird.
anywhere else. The studio, Face Roll Games, doesn't even have an office in Australia, just in China and America. So yeah, I don't really know what was going on here. Apparently this game was more like a card game battler. I don't know if this is like Call of Duty Hearthstone or something like that. There was a versus mode where you would get to play.
I mean, isn't this like not Clash of Clans, but isn't it like what's that other Clash of Clans game? It looks very much like it. Clash Royale? Battle? Something like that. Where it's like there's a top lane and a bottom lane. Usually the top lane would be the enemy, and the bottom lane would be you, and then you have to send out a card that we're constantly refilling. And the objective was that you had to send your units through 2 bridges. You had to decide whether you were going to put most of your units in one bridge or the other bridge. Because if you were putting most of your units during one bridge, your enemy could outnumber your units, but you could send other units through the other bridge to hopefully flank the enemy and then maybe kill them before they killed you, before they could overpower your guys.
play against other players, collect cards, and then use the cards to battle it out. Maybe with all the backlash Call of Duty was getting at that time because of Infinite Warfare and them seemingly coming across as tone deaf with the Call of Duty franchise, Activision might have chosen to pump the brakes on releasing Siege just to avoid even more bad PR. But yeah, this game, we never got to play it, unfortunately, but it existed. But now we reach the last title, the final Call of Duty game that released that was kind of a spin-off and not like a major release. Call of Duty Infinite Warfare Jackal Assault VR Experience. This was a PlayStation VR exclusive virtual reality downloadable mission for Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. I read that off the wiki. There's really not too much to this game. It's an interesting concept where you're in VR on the PlayStation VR, and you get to control a Jackal, one of those ships from Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and patrol and fight in combat. It's a pretty short-lived experience where you get to fly around and do stuff, but it definitely was neat, and it was polished at the very least. Obviously, it wasn't the most accessible game in the world, only releasing on PlayStation and you having to have a VR headset, but I want to say for the people who have actually played this, it was a positive little thing to get to do. It was just a downloadable bonus mission, but it was a cool little added bonus for free for PlayStation players, so hey, why not? I don't know if this will go down in history as one of the greatest forgotten Call of Duty titles, but it is a Call of Duty title of all time. If you're new here, maybe subscribe so you get more content like this. Just try it out. If you change your mind later, you can unsubscribe, whatever. We would really appreciate the support. If you like this longer video, check out our Call of Duty Black.
Alright, well, that was a good video from Rocket Sloth. Yeah, very interesting learning about all the Call of Duty games that most people will not play. Like, maybe if you find one in the bargain bin, you'd buy one of those Call of Duties, but I highly doubt anyone's really searching for these Call of Duty games because they don't even have the greatest story, they don't have the greatest gameplay. Probably pretty bad story, pretty bad gameplay. I would say probably the best one would probably be the Declassified, maybe the Zombies. But that could be just nostalgia talking. But yeah, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed Rocket Sauce, the Call of Duty games the world forgot. If you guys did enjoy the video, please make sure to subscribe or like the video. And if you guys enjoyed my reaction, please make sure to follow me on all my social medias, like my Twitter, my Twitch, my YouTube, my DLive, my TikTok, my Kick, Rumble, Odyssey, and Daily Motion. Make sure to check out my second YouTube channel and like and comment on all my videos, and even join my Discord. There you can stay up to date with everything I choose to, where my streams, videos, or anything else. But yeah, I hope to see you guys next time. Bye.